Good evening and welcome to Tripping on Legends. I am your host, Christopher Balzano, all by myself here tonight. This is episode 111 of your Stories from the Crossroads. This episode is a late coming to people, but I wanted to get it out, A, because it's been, for the last couple of weeks, been heavy on my back, in that it was an episode. I knew it was an episode. I wanted to do it. I was excited to do it. Had it all planned out. Had my notes. Had everything. Put out TikToks promoting it and all this stuff. And then it ended up that we weren't able to do it. So if you are following our social media here at Tripping on Legends, you can follow us on Instagram. And we go Instagram Live as we are right now. At Spooky Balzano. I'm sorry, Spooky Tripping. Spooky Balzano is our Twitter. And of course on Facebook at facebook.com/Tripping on Legends. If you were following on that, you know that my family and I, my kids, we do probably at least once a month, we do a movie-themed dinner night where we watch a movie. It's not always a horror movie, which is why it doesn't always come over on my Instagram, although it does, come over on my Facebook. And we make food that is tailor-made for that movie. So we've done Poltergeist, we've done Labyrinth, we've done Scott Pilgrim Saves the World, we've done Princess Bride. Like, they're not always horror themed, but a lot of times they are. And a few weeks ago, Ella came into the room and said, "I want to see it." I saw parts of the second one, the new one, not the older Tim Curry one. And I want to see the first one because I didn't get anything that was going on. And so we had a movie-themed dinner night to It, which food-wise was not as successful as some of the other ones have been. But it was really good watching the movie, and it totally freaked her out. And a few weeks before that, I think 2 weeks before that, I had the idea based on food to a large degree, but then also hashtag follow the signs. There were just things rolling around in my brain that I wanted to do Candyman. And I thought that it would be a really cool movie to show the kids. I hadn't seen the sequel, the recent sequel of it. And so I wanted to watch that, make some food that I knew would be really cool in terms of going along with the theme of Chicago, of Candyman himself, of urban legends. I wanted to make that food. And I wanted my kids to kind of watch it with me. Well, the unfortunate thing is, we had scheduled a Tripping on Legends for that next day, right? So the next night, we were going to go on. Ella and I were going to go on. We were going to discuss what we liked about the movie, what we didn't like about the movie, and then obviously these other things and these other issues and these other things I want to talk about having to do with the movie itself. It didn't turn out that way. Ended up that the next day she was completely worn out. She was completely tired, and she just wasn't feeling it, right? So what were you possibly going to do, right? We had to postpone it, and then it ended up that she just kind of farted out on me, right? Now, Tripping on Legends oftentimes is best when there's two people, at least, conversing with each other about what's going on. They play off of each other. No, everyone ditched me on this one, so this is just me talking about this. So I would love it. I've got things set up in such a way that I can actually read everything. I can read the people who are in the Facebook chat group, and I can also read people that are on the IG chat group. So anyone who wants to comment on things that I'm saying, unfortunately our technology is not such. I still haven't been able to get the setup right to get the phone number back running, so we can't have anybody call in, which is unfortunate because I've been told some people were like, "Oh, I really want to call and talk to you. You got to get the phones back up." We're not there yet. However, we are doing the best we can with what we've got, and the Crossroads presses on, right? Tripping on Legends presses on because I already have a few shows that I want to put out there, but I felt like I needed to close the ring, if you will. I had to take a hard look in the mirror, if you will, and finish this Candyman episode, because it's so the movie and the idea and what I'm talking about is so important to me. But then it was like I felt like, because some people were actually commenting and messaging me about, well, when are you going to do the friggin' Candyman episode? I'm waiting for the Candyman. I'm waiting for your take on Candyman, whether you like the movie, but also just the legend itself. And so here I am, doing the episode completely by myself, but that's okay because we're going to make the most of it. There's a story, and I'm going to say that it's a true story because I heard Spike say it himself on an interview. That during the 4th season of Buffy, and this was kind of like the 3rd season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer going into the 4th season, Joss Whedon physically assaulted James Marsden. Right? He physically assaulted him. And he was totally taken aback. James was totally taken aback and was like, why are you doing this? And Joss Whedon said it was because he didn't want Spike to be on the show. Now, since you've heard a whole bunch of other things about, the love of Spike and writing for Spike and all these kinds of things, but as a gut reaction, when the networks were saying that they wanted Spike to be a regular on the show, and in addition to that, he was going to play this kind of ambiguous bad guy role. Like, this was before they had the arc. If you're a Buffy fan, you know what I'm talking about. And he was like, well, why? Like, why are you so pissed about this? Like, why are you? And Joss said, evil is supposed to be black and white. And Spike being gray doesn't fit in the dynamic of this show. But more importantly, you don't fit. Like, the character of Spike doesn't fit into what we're doing here. This is supposed to be about her struggles to become a strong young woman. No, it's not. It's about stabbing demons. And Buffy was always intended to be a metaphor about becoming a woman, getting through high school, understanding that you had to make certain choices, you had to find the power within you, you had to fight the darkness, which is darkness was the work, all these kinds of things. We could go and I could do an entire season of Tripping on Legends, which is just about, what's going on with Buffy. I mean, there are college courses in it. He didn't like Spike because Spike messed up the analogy. He was a fly in the metaphor, allowing for there to be confusion as to what was the overall message of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Why am I telling this story? Other than the fact that it was part of the hashtag Follow the Signs as leading into me wanting to do this episode. Horror has always been metaphor. Horror has always been about much more than the creatures that are on the screen or on the page. It's always been about these, at its best, these creatures, this dark force that you're coming up against, not actually being just whatever monster of the week might be trailing you, right? Whatever the creature is, whatever the darkness is, that is the co-host of the hero in the story. It's supposed to be about something. And oftentimes, Twilight Zone's a great example. Oftentimes, when you couldn't make a social statement, you hit it in a science fiction or a horror story. And it's a great place to do it, right? Because people are being entertained. You have right at the cusp, right at the border of what is horror, what is science fiction, is what scares us shitless, right? And what scares us shitless tells us and reveals to us who we are. So you can talk about things. You can use Twilight Zone to talk about racism. You can use Frankenstein to basically say we're scared as hell of the way that science is progressing. Horror is metaphor at its best. And the people who do it the best understand that. They understand that the fear that might be for something outside of ourselves is really the fear of what's inside of us. All of those dark naturalist, the dark romanticists, Poe, Coolidge, these people who were essentially writing horror stories, they were the opposite side. There was like, there's something scary about nature. There's something in the dark, in the woods, trying to get us. But it's not the scary thing that's in the woods. It's the fact that we are disconnected from it that is making us fear it, right? Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the horror doesn't come until A, they go where they're not supposed to go, and B, they kill the albatross. They are striking out against it. I find it crazy that in so many of the reviews and so much of the evaluation of the newer, I have to say newer, I'm really behind the times with this, which is hilarious considering how important the original was to my life. It's crazy when I read reviews about the new Candyman, and I will continue to call it the Jordan Peele Candyman. I know that he was only a writer and producer, but it's Jordan Peele's Candyman, right? That they were like, it was talking too much about race. And I'm like, were you asleep for the last 20 years, man? Like, Candyman has always been a metaphor for racial tension. It's always been a journey through gentrification. So to take it and kind of look at the modern day, that means I'm friggin' old. The modern day version of it, you know, I kept saying remake and people are getting mad. The sequel to it, the direct sequel to it, and say, what the hell did you expect? Right? I am a huge fan. You are not going to find someone who's probably a bigger fan of the original. And it's hilarious. So, spoilers. I did not like the new one. And it had nothing to do with the racial elements because I wanted the racial elements. I was like, I want to see where Jordan Peele goes with this, right? And I didn't know much about Nina DaCosta going into it, but I wanted to know where he was going to take it, what his vision was. So it had nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, I would say that needed to be amped up a little bit. That needed to be ratcheted up a little bit, and wasn't. I just didn't like it because I didn't think it was a very good movie. So I was a little disappointed in that. Because I'm a fan of his. But leading into it, it's funny, we finished it, and Ella said, Can we watch is the original better? Can we watch the original? I'm not quite sure what she was looking for. I think she was looking for more to be scared. And I was like, hell yeah, we can. Now, I had watched the original a few days earlier, and I forgot exactly how influential this movie was on my life, right? There are a few movies that are like completely shifted the way that I think about things. One is Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, right? Completely changed my life. I remember going to school and trying to communicate to people just how important of a movie this was. And everyone was just like, shut up, we're listening to Bon Jovi. And then another one would be Candyman. The original Candyman. And watching it again, especially the first half hour of that movie, I was like, oh shit, like, this was who I wanted to be, you know? At 13, 14, these were the people who I wanted to be. I wanted to be those people, those scientists, those history professors, those people who were studying urban legends and talking about it. And if you think about what Tripping on Legends is, it's like the first half hour of Candyman, right? You look at a situation, you look at a story that's been going around that has influenced the community in which it is being told. You go out and you try to experience it. And unlike me, you try not to kill people or be responsible for the murder of a ton of people. There are a lot of messages in this about the power of myth, and more importantly, the importance of myth. Like, it's not like Nightmare on Elm Street in terms of there's a ghoul running around and there's a reason for the ghoul running around, but rather it is the exclamation point that there needs to be this kind of mythology, this kind of folklore fueling a community. They need it. And I think the second movie does a really good job of expressing that idea as well. So kudos to them on that part. I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood. That is what Candyman, that is what Daniel Robital says to Helen when he finally kind of comes back, right? If you don't know the story of Candyman, first of all, why the hell are you watching this, right? Or listening to this? Candyman, in his essence, is he was the son of a slave who rose to kind of prominence as an artist. And part of his artwork was that he would create portraits of beautiful women, right? Or at least rich women. He fell in love with one, he had an affair with one, he got one pregnant, and the townspeople ended up pulling him out. They cut off his hand. They smother him. They break a beehive. They smother him in the honey, and they set the bees, and he dies by 1,000,000 bee stings. Right? And he then becomes, and they did it right in the town square, he then becomes this symbol of these two opposing forces in Chicago. Right? When I think Chicago, I think Italians, I think Capone, I think things like that. But this is really the pushback of the African American community and the white people of the city. Now, I've been to Chicago once, and the first thing I noticed was just how predominant for lack of a better word, the tenements were. I was like, I can't believe it's this much of a factor of the city, that it's not pushed out further, like it is in a lot of other cities that I've been to, or it's like a different area, completely by itself. It was very clear where not even just the bad part of the town was, but where the housing was. Candyman becomes a symbol for that. He then, myth or the legend of him, or the essence of him, the spirit of him, really, is whispered by people, right? He lives, and that idea lives because people keep telling the story. When people stop telling the story, a legend dies, right? The legend dies when people are, it's the 3 death theory, right? So when people stop talking about you, but more importantly, he becomes a moniker for people trying to cause bad things in the neighborhood. So they are essentially pissing all over the legacy of the urban legend and the legacy of this spirit, because they are now committing black on black crime. And the people in the neighborhood are using the name of Candyman. Now, I'm talking about the original here, so we're gonna skip the other stuff that comes in the later ones. And for the record, I've never seen any of the other sequels. So Farewell to the Flesh and whatever the other one might be, I cannot speak on. He takes their name, right? These people who are living, who are flesh and bone, take his name. They commit crimes in his name. And it's not until Helen comes in looking to discover the legend that she actually confronts the real life person taking the name, takes him down, white savior syndrome, and now no one is longer scared of Candyman, which is why he is now forced to come back and reclaim his place in people's minds. As an adult, as a 47-year-old man, watching the original again that scared me, right? Imagine a a now time urban legend having to come to life to reclaim his mythology. So take the insane prisoner, the person escaped from the insane asylum who goes around and people don't believe that anymore. It's like, you can't, that doesn't make. And now we have a patient who's coming through killing people. Or a slew of babysitters and college roommates being killed, being slaughtered because we no longer believe those urban legends for one reason or another. And the force of urban legend has to come through and make them. Actually, I kind of sound like I'm writing a movie here. There's a need for that, right? Gentrification is a huge issue in a lot of these areas, right? I mean, we're talking about, Cabrini Green, we're talking about Abbott, we're talking about this public housing, which originally was not designed for African Americans, right? It was actually designed for Polish and Italian Americans to give them like the best place to live, and then they kind of started duplicating things, and they, like she says in the original one, they realized that the housing was too good, right? There wasn't a separation. If you really want gentrification, you need to push forces back, and create boundaries. And sometimes those are natural boundaries. Sometimes those are ones that the city itself creates. For gentrification to be successful, you need to continue to push back the elements that you feel are taking away from the city. And so they had this Cabrini Green, the original Cabrini Green, which they felt was too good, right? There wasn't enough of a separation. And so they essentially kicked all of them out, added some improvements, and made them high-rise housing. This is, for the large majority, for the most part, it is the story of that area of Chicago. And if it sounds crazy to you, it's not. You can find this in every part of the city. I remember going to City Point in Boston, and it being like, and if I'm remembering this correctly, City Point would be the nice mirror, if you will, of Harbor Point, or vice versa. So all of these, if you go into City Point, it's all of these. I think it was Harbor Point was the nicer one. If you go into Harbor Point, you see the bay. You see Boston. Everyone living in there is like 23 and just out of college and a working professional, or they're going to college because UMass Boston is right there, and then you have right across from it, but separated. This is like the buffer. You had the really bad part of Boston. So this is not something that is completely ridiculous, right? And it was, at its heyday, Abbott had like almost 4,000 people living in these halls, right? Cabrini Green had 1,500. North Side, West Side, most of which is now destroyed, right? These were mythological places of crime. These were the places that were constantly pointing to on the news all across the country about how bad things were in urban areas, right? And how bad gang violence was, and how anything that they wanted to push forward as the agenda of the week or the agenda of the time. Crack is gone crazy here. Gang violence has gone crazy here. Anything that was going to scare America, they were using Cabrini, Green, and Abbott as the symbols of that. They were the twin towers of terrible, if you will. Like this really bad section where all these things were happening, and we're still using that area. The row houses are still there, and we're still using that area when people talk about, this is happening and that is happening. Just all the modern issues that I don't really want to get into because we don't do politics here, but you know what I'm talking about. They then point to Chicago. They say, yeah, well, look what's happening in Chicago. Why can't they stop that? And The beautiful part about Candyman, both versions, I think, is that they create this blurred line between urban legend and modern times. We can't talk about those kinds of things. You can't talk about something such as police beatings in a movie and be able to communicate something about it without running into opposition. And the sequel got opposition. But even the issues that are being brought up in the original Candyman, it is a story that is using myth, and it's using folklore and urban legends, and it's using horror. It's using the figure of a bad guy to be able to communicate those ideas and talk through them. And just because you don't like the discussion and you don't like the end result doesn't mean that it's not well done. I'm not going to say that the sequel is not a good movie. I just thought the pacing was really bad. I thought it was really predictable in parts. I think that any movie that is predictable until the twist, regardless of whether the twist is seen or not seen, is not a good movie, right? It's just kind of building up to it. It's like, taking someone out on a date, and it's a horrible date, but you just think like, yeah, but if I do one amazing thing at the end, like I give her, a diamond necklace to end that it's going to make the date any better. And sometimes it does, right? It fools you into thinking that it is, but that didn't make the date any better. So what is this built on, right? This is built, these movies and the mythology, the foundation for all of these movies is based on some really well-known urban legends and a fairly well-known case, right? Many people don't realize, even though it's kind of talked about it's talked about in the movie, it's kind of one of those things where as soon as something is talked about in a movie, you assume that it is not real. You know what I'm saying? Like it's part of it. But let's talk about the real case for a second. Let's talk about the initial spark, which is the case of Ruthie Mae McCoy. And all the movies kind of play on her a little bit, right? In the movie, her name is Anne Marie McCoy. So they kind of change it around a little bit, which I don't get why they don't. I mean, it's as soon as you start looking into the case, it's obvious that that it's what's going on is going on, right? Like that they're talking about someone, so why not use the real one? A lot of this comes from the article, it's called "They Came In Through the Bathroom Mirror" by Stephen Balgaria, which was originally published in The Reader. That was the name of the newspaper, The Reader, in 1987, and then he kind of updated the story when Candyman came out, when it was obvious that Candyman was about it. Ruthie Mae was crazy, right? Even though she had the nickname Miss May, which make it think like she was one of our neighbors. She was living in the Grace Abbott houses, part of the ABLA. She was 52, and she was pretty much unliked. Like she was like that crazy woman that would like yell at pigeons and was unfriendly. And kids already had kind of like a creepy woman mentality about her, right? Like, that creepy person that lives in the building that you can make up stories about. She was the one that the kids were doing through it. She makes a 911 call. She was living in apartment 1109 on the 11th floor. In April of 1987, she makes a 911 call. And she says that she's being attacked. Someone is out to get her, and they are coming through the walls. And of course, the 911 operator, and you can actually get the entire transcript of the 911 call. They're like, what are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean they're coming through the walls? How can people... And of course, they're 911 operators. They don't know this person's reputation, right? But they think that she's crazy, right? That she is paranoid, she's delusional somehow. What are you talking about, people coming through the walls? And she said, Once they're in the apartment, she said she screams out, "They came through the cabinet drawer. They came through the cabinet, right? They came through the window, through the mirror, and they still don't know." And the cops come out and they pound on the wall, boom, 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 and no one answers, and so they just kind of go away. So the next day, some people who are regulars in her life, even though they're not necessarily friends with her, they're close in that they constantly interact. They notice that she's not coming to the places she normally went to. So a few different people call the police, and the next day, the cops come again and they bang on the door, boom, 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 and nothing happens. Right? No one answers, and so they don't do anything about it. They don't do anything. They don't go in there. They don't check up on her. They just leave. This becomes part of the story, of course, because the thing then becomes, well, if she was a middle-class person, if she was not an African-American person, would the police have shown more concern when she didn't show up? Which, once again, is a debatable part of the story. But the next day, they get in. They found out that she was shot 4 times. And that, more importantly, she didn't die immediately. That the first time that they came to the apartment, first of all, she would have been saved if 911 or emergency services, I should say, had sent someone out. Right? Her life would have been saved if someone had done that. If they had actually taken it seriously. But of course, it's in Greece, it's an Abbott, so we're not going to send people there. Because there was this mindset of, let them handle things out, and then we'll pick up afterwards. That was honestly the mindset. There's a cop quoted as saying that in the article, something very much like that. The mindset of the police department was, let them take care of themselves, and we go in afterwards, and we clean things up, and we pretend to investigate what happened. But she was still alive that first time they knocked on the door. Which means if they had shown more concern, if they had reacted faster, if they had gone into the building, if they had gone into the apartment, they might have been able to save her life. Now, the crazy part of this is that this is like the creepiest thing you can possibly imagine. I don't know how many of you actually have lived in apartment buildings and apartment complexes. Now, I live in a house. I rent, but I live in a house. I remember when I first moved in here, and keep in mind that before then, I had lived in a house for a decade. I remember not wanting to make too much noise because I didn't want to disturb people. It's a different mindset to live in an apartment. And I'm not even just talking like a duplex, which also has kind of this going on. I'm talking about the idea that the person that is not you, right? Someone who could cause you danger. Forget about, your wife waking up in the middle of the night and stabbing you, or your kids doing something to you. There's someone right on the other side of that wall who you don't know. You think you know, right? At best, you know them as a neighbor. But if something were to happen and they knocked on your door, you would be maybe eager to let them in. They are your neighbor. And yet, what are you letting into your house? And your safe haven, the thing that can keep your mind at ease, is that there is at least a wall. But in the Abbott homes, as well as Cabrini Green, that didn't exist. Just like in the movie, there were these passageways in between the apartments where someone, if they squeezed enough, could get into just about any apartment on that side of the building by squeezing through the walls, dropping out the medicine cabinet, and creeping into an apartment. And so when Ruthie Mae was crazily saying that they were coming through the walls, they were in fact coming through the walls. And that didn't change, right? There were both the the higher priced as well as the tenement type housing had that feature in there. So I can't think of anything. Your house is your sanctuary, right? Your house is where you're supposed to be safe. It's where you're supposed to feel as if you can go to sleep at night. I watch Mr. Ballin. I watch, true crime before I go to sleep at night. And you could always tell, like, when I've watched it, I have to, I lock everything up, right? If you know me, sometimes my back door is not unlocked, the slider, because it's a pain in the butt, and I forget it in the morning. I slam my face as I'm letting my dog out. When I watch those things, I lock that up. Because, and of course, I always do it when my kids are here. Although I know Champ's going to, like, kill anybody that tries to get in here. You're supposed to be safe in your house, right? You close your eyes. You go to sleep. You're completely defenseless. Your house is supposed to be safe. We can talk about Candyman, but a 6'5" man with a hook from an arm who's been dead for 150 years or 100 years is not nearly as scary as thinking that you can't put your head down and be safe. You can't step into the shower. Psycho. You can't step into the shower without thinking that someone could be on the other side. We covered this in our in our bathroom episode. I was just reviewing the bathroom episode today. Your house is supposed to be safe. And what a great metaphor for racial tension. You can go into your ivory towers as much as you want, but you can't escape the fact that to some degree you've stolen that land and they're coming up through the walls to get you. So it's interesting because when this article was published, and if you follow the social media, you've seen the cover of it and everything like that. When they came in through the bathroom mirror was first published, there was a huge outcry in the white community about this, right? And it's like, it was scary, it was terrifying, it was horrific, it sparked the movie, but it was just everyday living for the African Americans who were in these houses. There were a ton of them all together, right? This ABLA was not just Cabrini and Abbott, it was like other places as well. They realized they had lived with this. They knew how to protect themselves, or at least that they needed to be protected, that there was a danger out there. So all of a sudden you take something like that, which is a genuine fear, right? And you have to protect against it. It's interesting because there are very obvious urban legends that the rest of this story is built on, right? That the whole thing is built on. But to me, the first thing that came to my head was the mini lights. And if you don't know what the mini lights are, check in the show description, and you'll be linked to it, because it was one of our first episodes, and we touch upon it once in a while. I don't do it in presentations. I don't generally write a lot about it. It's in Haunted Love, but I don't usually write too much about it because it's a really complex story to get into. Mark Muncie and I were joking that we should write a book about it where all we do is argue, for 150 pages or whatever about who has the right version of the story, because there are so many versions of the story, because and urban legends, especially ghostly urban legends, do this. They evolve to the needs of the people. Very similar situation. We're talking about the St. Pete area. If you don't know the story, we're talking about the St. Pete area, and it's an older urban legend which gets reborn when they build Tropicana, the Trop, and they start pushing into the African American neighborhood of St. Pete. And they push it, they are creating this tension between business owners who just want to offer a Chili's restaurant for people coming out of the ball game, or want parking spaces to the culture that has developed around historic St. Pete. As that continues to push, you now have, if you were in St. Pete, now obviously I wasn't in St. Pete 20 years ago. If you were in St. Pete 20 years ago and you go there now, it's a completely different place. Not because as the Trop pushed things out and pushed things out, all of a sudden now different areas became very, very hipster. I remember that when we went there. It was very much like, oh wow, I kind of feel like I feel too old for being here right now. And the more they do that, the more that the stories of the mini lights grow. So you have this surge of this story of this woman being protected by these creatures, these two miniature, almost like white ogre type people who are protecting that land. And so, African American boys and girls are told, don't go out or else the mini lights will get you. There are so many complex issues with it. We really should do like a round table on it at some point. But it reminded me that racial tension and the moniker. Now, Candyman would be the exact opposite of that, right? It would not be the symbol. The urban legend would not be the white people pushing up against the black people, but it would be the black people pushing up against the white people and the black people. But both of them have this idea of this territory is being protected. It's not controlled by you. It's controlled by another force. And that force is going to come and get you if you step out of line. And the motivation behind that is in the Mini Lights legend. It's kind of hidden and kind of presented. It's definitely the story of the outsider, but it's kind of presented as either a religious one, and that religion can either be a witch, or a Mennonite, or another type of Christian religion, or it's just those crazy, the leftovers of those crazy carnival folk or circus folk that are still in the area. So either way, whichever version, it's still the story of the outsider clashing. But then you also have more well-known, more universal stories that are going on. And it's funny because in doing this and looking at these stories, we use these words interchangeably. We say legend and myth and folklore and urban legend as if they are interchangeable words, and they're really not at all. We use them as a way to just come up with a blanket term for stories told in the area about the people of that area that have a somewhat weird or supernatural twist to them. But that's not really what any of those terms mean, except for legend. But it's easy for us to use them, and so I use them interchangeably, especially when I'm writing, so I don't use the same word over and over again. But these stories are much more about much more in the vein of an urban legend. The first and most obvious one is the boogeyman, which probably, if we're going to get technical about it, falls into the idea of legend, right? There's a boogeyman, and the boogeyman is very rarely motivated solely by wanting to be evil. He's evil, right? He's coming to get you, and he's evil, and there's nothing you can do to stop him. And he's always in the fringe. He's always in the shadows, waiting to jump at any moment. But the boogeyman as a character, which is sometimes not really focused on, is that there's almost always a cause and effect to the boogeyman, right? Or else it wouldn't be a good deterrent. Don't do this, or else the boogeyman will get you. Make sure you do this, or the boogeyman will get you. You know the best way to make sure that there's no one under your bed? Make sure you clean your bed before you go to sleep, and then it's there. In the closet, make sure the closet's clean, or else these are, and of course these are little kid ones, but the boogeyman is the enforcer of rules and the 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 dueler out of punishment. And so it makes sense that he would be the enforcer of the rules that we have. Because it's simple. It's a simple cause and effect. Do this, don't do that, right? Evil is kind of complex. If you ever watch those pitch meetings, I love pitch meetings. I think they're hilarious. They're like the things that genuinely make me laugh. And he says, well, why does he do that? It's like, because I need it for the plot or reasons, right? Like those kinds of ideas are evil in movies nowadays. And for, trust me, I've been watching Creature from the Black Lagoon. Evil is evil sometimes just for reasons, but that's not the boogeyman. And that's not really overly scary. The idea that you could do something wrong and someone's going to come and get revenge because of that, or dole out punishment because of that, is dole out punishment for that, is the really frightening part of it. Because we all want to be perfect, right? We all want to be good. And there's this constant pressure to be good. But imagine if you just step out a little bit and someone's going to come and gut you with a hook. Then let's talk about the hook. Now, this is the worst part of Candyman. And if you like it, then you like it. But it completely contradicts, other than looking cool, it completely contradicts everything that legend is about. The Hookman himself. So the story goes, they take young Daniel, who has just impregnated somebody, and they cut off his hand with the intention of killing him, but then put a hook in there? So on one level, on the very basic level, it doesn't make sense, because why would you give the person who you're torturing a weapon? It's not like they said, like, you know what, we need to even this up a little bit, so we're going to be an unruly mob who's going to kill you, but we're going to allow you to have a hook. So on a physical level, on just a storytelling level, it doesn't make sense. It kind of contradicts what that group would do. It's kind of like in the Bloody Bucket, when they fire the African-American woman rather than just killing her for killing her children. It doesn't make any sense. But it also doesn't make sense on a mythical level, on a what is the urban legend really about. Just going by some of the people who I know are in the chat room, block your ears if you feel like you're too young to hear this kind of thing. The Hookman legend, two people are on a date. They're at the makeout place. Inspiration Point. Is that what they used to call it in Happy Days? Inspiration Point. And they're getting hot and heavy. The girl stops him. And that's an important part of the legend. The girl stops him. He's kind of frustrated. All night they've been hearing that there's an escaped lunatic with a hook for a hand on the loose. Because he's flustered, because he is basically cock-blocked, he gets crazy, he rips out of there, he drops her off at home, gets her out of the car because he's not getting any, and he notices that there's a hook on the door, that the hookman was just about to get them. And he had pulled out? He had pulled out too soon or at the right time and stopped it. Any kind of analysis of this legend, it talks about the fact that that hook is a penis, right? The hook is a penis, and it's about this concept that if you go out and you are hooking up in the car before you're married with a man, because this is definitely an urban legend pointed at women, not men, you will be killed, right? The man with the hook who's trying to get you is the person who's inside the car, not the person who's in, not the person inside the car, not the person on the outside. So to me, it seems crazy that they would say, hey, you had sex with a rich white girl. We are punishing you because you are a black man, and that is not what you are supposed to do. So let us give you this phallic symbol before we kill you. Doesn't make sense to me. Like, not, I mean, you could make the argument that maybe they were doing it in a mocking kind of way, but it doesn't seem to bode right for me. Like, that's not, it doesn't feel genuine to me. So, the Hook Man is obviously has been a kind of a sensitive part for me. I've never really understood it. You have in the original the razor blade hoax, and I always feel sensitive saying this because people shoot back at me. It's kind of like the babies in the railroad story of the babies who died on the bus, and the little kids who died on the bus. And someone always comes up with some obscure, and it's like, dude, it's only happened one place. People putting razor blades, even in modern times, even in, like today, people putting razor blade in candies doesn't happen. A stranger has never been. This is where the never gets in the way, right? Which I've studied this, and still there's a moment of doubt of me saying this. A stranger has never done that. There have been cases of poisoning. There have been cases of targeted drugging, but not where a stranger, the person who lives down the street, who may or may not be a stranger, right, has put a razor blade in the candy with the intentions that a random child, or in the case of Candyman, in both of these movies, a lot of children, that's where it doesn't make sense, are going to eat the candy and cut their mouth. Now, there have been several cases of relatives doing it to their own kids, right? Which is crazy, but that is more true than a stranger doing it, which is the same case for the poisoning and all the other things that we get freaked out about Halloween. And it doesn't increase, the drug thing I mentioned earlier doesn't increase at Halloween, and it's a very rare circumstance, and it's once again usually a very targeted tampering. And by drugs, I mean illegal drugs, not like the aspirin case. So the movie uses that. The movie brings that urban legend up. And I think that it's not even really, like, you can, especially because of the darkness, the physical darkness, not like the intellectual or spiritual darkness of the original. The darkness of the original, you sometimes even miss that that's what that is when she gets into the wall. The sequel, the Peel sequel, does a really good job of bringing that person forward, almost using the legend against itself, right? That the police reacted a certain way because they thought this was the Candyman who was doing that, and he wasn't. In the same way that the legend isn't true, this guy wasn't actually doing that, it was someone else, and he gets persecuted for it, and he gets killed for it. Which then perpetuates this idea that the African American is coming to get you. And look at that, they can't even respect their own community enough to not hurt each other. So in that case, it's a really good urban legend to use to communicate that. They have one of my favorite, and if you don't know what it is, it's kind of a it could go by very quickly because you're still getting settled into the story. But one of the urban legends, it's not, the movie isn't based on it really, although if you give me long enough I could probably twist it. The story of the babysitter, the baked baby, right? The cooked baby, where the parents go out and they, for the first time, and they leave their baby with a who they deem as a responsible babysitter. They've heard good things about her, but she is in most circumstances, or the earliest circumstances, she is like a hippie, and the kids go out to they go out to it's usually a play or like the theater or something, and they call they literally call because it's an old story, right? They call at intermission to check up on the baby because they're kind of freaked about it because it's their first time leaving the baby, and she's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Things are going well. The house is done, and the baby's asleep, and I actually was able to put the turkey in the oven for you for tomorrow, so it's all good." And so the mom goes back, and she's like, "Oh, I feel so much better. Everything's good. The baby's down to sleep. The house is all set. The turkey's in the oven." She goes, "Well, wait a minute. We didn't have a turkey." And so they rush home, and they find that the babysitter's there, and she's kind of tripping, laying on the table, tripping, looking at her hands. And the baby has been cooking in the oven for the last hour. Sometimes stuffed, sometimes not. Once again, a story that has never happened, and it's just told really quickly. But I think it really creates the atmosphere of the absolute ridiculousness of it. Like, that story, you would think. Now, there are stories of people trying to cook people after they were dead to hide the body, but it's another one of these, just like the American Girl, Tom Petty urban legend of the suicide at Beatty Tower at UF. The drugs are coming for your children, and if you don't protect them from it, and like, what were those parents doing going out anyway? That mom should have been staying at home taking care of that kid. Keep in mind, this is the analysis, analysis of it. It's not me saying women need to be at home. So please do not message me about being a misogynist, because these are what these stories mean. These are and why they were created and what they're perpetuating. In terms of our ghostly world, we have the idea, the concept that all of this comes down to, right? I mean, we can talk about racial inequality, we can talk about gentrification, we can talk about, we can even talk about the nature of tulpas, right? And an urban legend being told enough that the subject of the urban legend comes alive. Or we can talk about the idea of haunted love, right? Coming back because you were separated from your wife and child. This movie at its bare bones, the legend of Candyman at its bare bones, is Poltergeist. It is a man who was burnt alive, or he was killed. Then he was thrown on a fire, and his ashes were scattered, and then so he was never given a proper burial. His ashes are then scattered, so he's all over the place, and then he comes back to haunt that area. Right? That's the Native American burial ground legend. That is the displaced grave. That is the unsettled business because your body's not where it's supposed to be. It's almost as if, like, if they had put it all in a jar and buried it in one place, in that place, would Candyman have ever come back? We believe the story because it has that revenge from the grave, and the body's not where it's supposed to be. Now, I haven't seen the other two movies. I haven't seen Farewell to the Flesh and whatever the third one was called. I don't know if those get into the idea of, like, if we just find the ashes and bury it, which of course you can't do, we can get rid of him. Which would also go against the idea of, like, the story has got to continue. It's a story about a guy who can't find peace because he doesn't know where his body is. He does some pretty bad things along the way. And then ultimately, the legend that drives this. But does it? It's such deep story. It's so salsa dancing with urban legends and our ideas of and what we're scared of and boogeyman. And yet, what do people remember about Candyman? They remember the looking in the mirror and saying his name 5 times. Now, I've been careful. I think I've said it more than 5 times, but partly because of my own fear and partly because of my looks. I don't have a lot of mirrors in the house, so I'm safe. I haven't said it into a mirror, although there are plenty of shiny objects. And I am saying it into a phone, which is showing me a reflection. But I think I'm safe. But it's the idea of saying his name 5 times, right? And in the... I've watched the trailers of the original, but I don't know about the original, like, promotional material. I don't remember that. I don't know whether it was as much of a driving force in presenting the movie, as in selling the movie, as it was. But the sequel, it pushed it. And I think part of that is due to the fact that it was tapping into the old audience of it. But it really pushed the saying his name 5 times in a mirror idea, right? And the sequel does a really good job of showing it cross culture because of that, which I think is really good. But it is Bloody Mary, right? It is all of those, which once again connects to the mini lights, because you have to say mini lights come out tonight 3 times. It is a variation of the Bloody Mary legend, which, if you're a follower of Tripping on Legends, you know we've hit upon that several times. But the idea that there is some force out there which is ready to spring, and the way that it can spring, the way you give it power to spring, is by conjuring it, and you conjure it by saying its name. The idea completely predates the Mary Worth story, the original Mary Worth story, right? I mean, we're talking to name something and to own something is like Bible, right? I mean, it's not Bible the way my kids would say Bible, but it's in the Bible, right? The idea of you name the things and therefore you have control over them. You strip a name off from someone, say, I don't know, someone you're putting into slavery. You strip their name and give them another name. Names have power. They're what bring things forth. They're what can push things down. If your mom yells your name from the other room, especially if she uses your middle name, you know exactly what's going on. Like, there's a power behind and a control factor behind the use of a name. And that is what Candyman's based on, or based in. That idea that you say his name 3 times and he comes forth. Now, the idea in Candyman is that saying his name perpetuates his existence. Not quite the same in the Mary Worth and Bloody Mary legends, right? Where it's more of she's ready to pounce for and to make up for some injustice. Here we have the injustice part and the springing part's there. But the mere fact of saying the name means that you are honoring, remembering at the very least the story. And that's what allows it to cross racial barriers, and it's what allows it to cross from the lower class to the middle class, and then in the original, the elite. But it's also the idea of the transformation of these legends, right? The idea that, you know, in the first, Candyman spends a lot of time talking about we will be on their lips again. We will let them remember. We will shed blood now so that they don't think it's just a story. They'll still be scared shitless. They won't be able to be like, oh yeah, that's a story people used to tell, and to scare people. It'll be something real. It'll be something graphic. And it does happen, right? Because the story they remember in the sequel is Helen's story. And then in exploring Helen's story, they're able to look at these other Candymen who have lived throughout, leading into the Robital. Robital? you have at the end of Candyman that he says, the husband says the name 5 times, and she comes out of the mirror. She has become the urban legend. She's become myth. Now the interesting thing is that Candyman pushes throughout the whole first movie of the idea of A, family, we're going to be a family, and B, we will be remembered. And ultimately, the white savior saves Anthony, but then also has killed Candyman, right? She's burnt him, but she took the mask off the people who were pretending to be Candyman, and then her death is so horrific and so memorable and so connected and observed. He sees the hook coming down. The little kid sees the hook coming down, and then she's the one that comes out. That she essentially replaces their Candyman. Just like she and her people are replacing the area. How they're pushing up and pushing out the element to replace it with something different. A lot of that is not in the original Clive Barker story. So you have to imagine that these filmmakers had to do it with intent, right? This is not just a random thing. This is not just, we're going to put these things on. It's not Nightmare on Elm Street. It's not, let's put some cute things together. Let's have a backstory that creeps people out, which maybe has a little bit of a deeper meaning. Let's make sure that he kills them in really interesting ways so people keep coming back to see how he's going to kill the next person. And there's a whole different kind of thing at play with that. This is urban legend, which we use to express something deeper, being used to express something even deeper. And what makes me keep coming back, right? I've watched the movie again after this. Like, my daughter loved the original once we watched that one. And I've now watched it again since that. But it's also the ideas behind it that drive me. Not just that it's a good horror movie, but the ideas that are this is what myths do for us. This is the nature of myths. This is, even without us knowing why we're telling it, it takes a place in our community and walks in between the walls of our apartments. And no matter how much we want to think that we are safe in whatever world that we are in, it is constantly pushing up against the walls, demanding to be retold because it's still relevant. Not because it needs legs, but because it already has those legs. I would love to hear your thoughts on this and kind of the way that we consume urban legends, the way that we use urban legends. I would love to hear you guys. You guys can email me at spookytripping@gmail.com. Spookytripping is also my Instagram. Like I said, we usually go 8:30 on Tuesday nights, but it's kind of a wacky week, and so I wanted to get this episode out. But normally, we go live at 8:30 on Tuesdays. We are trying to reestablish our connection to midnight.fm, where it's always midnight, and make sure that we're still being broadcast on that. But we are being broadcast on Instagram, on Facebook, facebook.com/tripping on legends, where I've been posting more and more little tidbits about the legends and the stories that we're going to be talking about. And of course, you can always adjust. Just give me a call. I was going to say give me a call, and I realized I don't have the phone number anywhere near me because I haven't been doing calls. But there are tons of ways to get in contact with us. If you like the show, if you were drawn in by the word Candyman, and this might be the first time, please make sure you're getting this podcast wherever you get your podcast, other than Spotify, and you are liking the show and maybe telling someone about it, and maybe even, and it's best, leaving a review. So I feel like I need to go into a mirror right now and whisper, don't let my summer break be over 5 times, and hoping that, teaching will somehow get pushed back and I'll have more time to give stuff to you guys and present stuff to you guys. But I know that's not going to happen. So I'm just going to keep on rocking with my stories. On behalf of Deanna and Ella, who are not here tonight but will be in upcoming episodes as well, my name is Christopher Balzano, and here's hoping that all of your trips